Hello guys, my name is Remik, and in today's video we'll set up the identity API between Angular 17 and .NET 8 Web API. We'll use the existing refresh token mechanism to get the access token, get the refresh token, and store it in the Angular 17 application. And then, in case of getting any 401 unauthorized responses from the API, will refresh the access token based on the refresh token that we retrieved from our .NET 8 Web API, in fact from the Identity API. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, then please hit the subscribe button down below, write a comment, give me a like, and as always, now we are going straight into the topic. First of all, we'll start with a short demo what we'll actually build in today's video. As you see on the screen, we have two input fields for the email and the password, and also the login button. All of those are coming from the Bootstrap, and here on the front-end side we have the Angular 17, and on the backend side we have the .NET 8 Web API that is using the Identity API to have all of the methods for the registering the user, to log in, to refresh the token, confirm email, and so on and so forth, and one custom endpoint that is restricted with the authentication of the JWT. That is to get the products. As you see, for now, when I will execute this, I have 401 unauthorized because it requires us to pass the access token that our API will generate for us based on the user that will be logged in. So we'll start with registering the user. So I'll just type user1 email.com. And also the password will be user123 exclamation mark. Copy that. As you see, we have created the user correctly, and now we have to copy that data to our front-end side just to see what will happen. So this kind of email, and also the user123 exclamation mark as the password. When we log in, as you see, we have the output of this get products endpoint. And as you see, here we have the access token that is retrieved from our API, and in the cookies, we have the refresh token. And this refresh token will be used in this refresh endpoint to get the new access token, because as the default here we have set up that the access token will be valid only for the 60 seconds. So after expiring that time, then we'll have the 401 unauthorized error from our API. So then we have to use this refresh endpoint to refresh the access token based on this refresh token from the cookie, and then we'll have the access for that endpoint. So as you see, when I'll refresh it, then for sure I will have at first 401, and then after refreshing the token, we'll have the proper response. So I will go to the console, I refresh. As you see, the first call was 401 unauthorized, and then we received the same amount of data that we requested before after the login. As you see, when we will go to the network tab, we see that it was 401, then we performed the refresh call to our API, and then we received 200 OK response with the products list. Alright, we have to create a solution and also the project name for our .NET 8 Web API. So I will just call it token-based authentication demo.api, and the solution will be called token-based authentication demo, and I will create it. Once it is created, we have to also create two more class libraries. It will be called token-based authentication demo.domain, just to keep our entity that will be like some kind of the fake entity in here, and also one class library infrastructure, just to keep our DB context inside and also the migrations. Alright, I will remove that class 1 as the placeholder and I will create the product.cs, and inside of it I'll create product that will contain a couple of the properties. It will be ID, name, description, price, and also the quantity. And now I can go to the program CS to get rid of that weather forecast that is always created by the Microsoft, and we'll create our own get endpoint just to retrieve sample 5-element list of those products. I'll just remove it, also those not needed comments, and I will create app map get, and it will be with the /get products, and we'll return new list of the product, and we have to reference our project for this domain, and inside of it I'll just copy paste one sample list of those products, so we'll have 5 elements. Once we have our get endpoint for the product list set up correctly in our program CS, we can start with installing the Nuget packages required for the Entity Framework core. So I'll just type Entity Framework core, and we'll see what we'll have. So we have to install Entity Framework core from the Microsoft in our API project. I'll pick this version, install it, we need also that one related to the SQL server. So Entity Framework core dot SQL server, we have to pick this one. And also Entity Framework core dot design. We'll pick this one, and also with the version 8.0.2. And now we have to install also Nuget packages for our infrastructure project where the DB context will be stored. So I'll just start with the same. So we need the SQL Server, relational, tools, and the normal Entity Framework core. So I will just clean this up, and I will type entity Framework core, and we have to get the same version. So Entity Framework core, then we need the relational Nuget. So I'll pick this one, hold here. We need also the SQL Server one, SQL Server, and the last one will be Entity Framework core dot tools. So I'll just wipe this out. Dot tools. We have to install one more Nuget package, and it will be called Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core. So I'll just type it, Identity Entity Framework Core, that is displayed here, and I will pick the same version as it is. And now we can start with creation of our DB context, and I will call the DB context demo DB context.cs, and we have to inherit from the identity DB context. Identity DB context. I'll create a constructor, and I will pass DB context options from the EF core called option. Options, and we have to pass this to the base constructor, those options. The reason for the inheritance from this identity DB context is that it will automatically for us, when we'll create the migration, it will create for us those couple of the tables in the database for the role claims, roles, user claims, user logins, user roles, users, and the user tokens. So it will be all created when we'll perform our first migration, and then also we'll just apply this migration to the database, but we'll just do it in a moment. Now there's the time to set up the connection string in our app settings JSON file inside of the API project. We need this connection string in order to perform our first migration and then to let our API to be connected with the database. So I will just write a comma in here, and then I will just type connection strings, and inside of it we'll have the DB connection string, and I will just type server will be equal to the local host with the port 1433. Database will be called demo DB, then the user ID. This is the my user ID, so it will be SA, and also I will just write down password, and the password will be the same as I have set up in my Docker Compose video, how to set up properly the .NET 8 Web API, the React, and also SQL Server. So if you haven't watched this video, then I highly recommend this. It will be in the description down below, and I will just write this password. So it will be a very complex 123 password. So I'll just copy this not to have any mistake inside of it, this kind of password. And then also we have to trust the server certificate, so trust server certificate will be equal to the true. Alright guys, now we are ready to set up the identity API endpoints and also our demo DB context inside of the program CS file in the API project. So we can start with that. I'll just type builder.services.add context, and we have to pass the type, so demo DB context, and for sure we need to reference, we have to reference the infrastructure project, and we have to pass the options as the parameter, and then inside here we have to use opt.use SQL Server, and we have to type builder.configuration get connection string, and the connection string was called DB connection string, and it will be this name. The next thing to set up is the identity API endpoints, so we'll type builder.services.add identity endpoints of the identity user, identity user, and down here we have to use also the add entity framework source, and we have to pass our demo DB context. And now, by default, our identity API endpoints will produce for us the access tokens for 3600 seconds of the expiration time. We would like just to have only 1 minute expiration for that access token, so we can set up this here as well. So it will be the builder.services.configure all. We have to pass the type, and it will be the bearer token options, and it will be option as the parameter, and we can just type option dot per token expiration, and we will use the timespan dot from minutes, and I will assign this to 1 minute only. And we have use app.map identity API of the type identity user in order to have our identity endpoints here. Then after that, I will also add app use authentication, and then app use authorization. And for now, we can also at once create the course policy for our Angular 17 project that will be calling this API, and we have to open the door for our frontend just to be able to communicate with our API. So we'll just create it. So we need some kind of the course policy. So I'll just type builder.services.add course. I'll just pass the OPT as the options here. And like the first one will be the OPT add policy, and it will be called course policy. And after that, we have to pass the policy builder, and inside of that policy builder, we need to use, as for now, allow any header, allow any method, but with origins, and our Angular frontend will be hosted on the 4200 port. So I will just type localhost 4200. So it will allow only request from that certain address with the certain port. And just to apply this course policy, we have to use this in our middlewares section. So I will just, above the identity API, I will just type app use course, and I will pass course policy. We are ready now to set up our first migration and also apply this migration to the database. So I'll just type in the console .NET ef migrations add, and it will be called init. And we have to specify where our .NET 8 web API is stored with the flag s. So I will just type token-based authentication demo.api, and with the flag p, we have to specify where our DB context is stored. So in this infrastructure project, so it will be token based authentication demo dot infrastructure. As you see, the build has started and it was succeeded, and we have inside of our infrastructure project the migrations folder with the first migration. And now we can apply this migration to our database. So we can use the dotnet ef database update command, and we have to specify once again where our API is stored. So this directory, and also with the p flag the same, so infrastructure project. We'll just modify it. As you see, the build has been started. And now, as you see, our database has been created with the proper database tables. As you see, the create index of the ASP.NET user roles to the role ID. So it means, yeah, and also as you see, the create table statement. So everything was done properly. We can also connect to this database to see our database tables. I'll just copy our connection string, and I will use the connection string for the SQL server, and I will just connect to the database. And as you see, here we have the demo DB, and we have all of those database tables. So as for now, we can just go inside of the ASP.NET users inside of it. And as you see, we have a lot of columns that were generated for us automatically by the identity setup and also the entity framework core. Alright guys, so now there is the final setup of our Swagger in order to give the possibility to the user to pass the proper JWT token after the login request, and then for this JWT to be applied as the bearer header, so the token will be applied to the request and the user will be authenticated based on that token. So as for now, it's not restricted. We have the map get endpoint for the products, and we have to add one method, apply to it, require authorization. With this method that is applied here, we'll need to pass the JWT token. And of course, it could be done with the postman, as we'll add the header on our own, but we would like to give the possibility to the user to give also the JWT in the Swagger itself. So I'll just go here a little bit up. As you see, we have this add Swagger gen. So we'll just pass the O as the options, and we have to add the security definition. So I'll use add security definition here, and I will call this bearer auth, and as the next parameter it will be the new open API security scheme, and inside of it we have to assign as in, it will be the parameter location as the header, because we would like to append JWT in our headers. The description, it will be enter proper JWT token. We'll just call this name as the authorization. The next will be the scheme, and this is very important. The scheme will be bearer, and this bearer related to the JWT, of course, so the format will be the bearer format will be equal to JWT in the uppercase, and the type will just assign this to the security scheme type of the HTTP. Of course, here you can assign this as the API key, but then you will need to pass this bearer keyword, then the space, and then your JWT. With this setup, you will not be able, and you will not be actually required to pass this bearer keyword and then space. You'll just only pass the JWT token inside of that input field. And now we have to add security requirement. So it will be new open API security requirement. And inside of it, just open this up. It will be new open API security scheme. And the reference will be the new open API reference. And inside we have to pass the type as the reference type security scheme. There. And then ID will be equal to bearer auth. And here we have to also pass the array.empty of the type string. You have to remember here that this bearer auth here name that is called as the parameter to the security definition has to be the same as this ID. If it will not be the same, then probably you'll have some kind of issues that you'll not be able to pass this JWT token. So just as the reminder, the very good practice is just to have the same name here and also there. We have to add one more line before we will run our API. We need to specify the builder services at authorization in order to use this middleware here. Alright guys, so as you see on the screen, our API is up and running. We have a couple of those identity API endpoints set up here, and also our get products endpoint. As you see, when I will execute this, we have 401 unauthorized error, so we have to pass the JWT token. So I have created just before one user, and I will just use this login method in order to get this token. So I will just remove it. Email, it was user email.com, and also the password was user123!. I'll execute this. We have the proper response. As you see, we have here the access token when it will expire. So I will just take the access token. I'll just copy that token and I will pass this in this bearer auth as the value. So we don't have to pass this bearer because it's already there. I'll just pass the JWT token. I'll authorize. As you see, it's authorized, and now we'll be able to get the product list. Execute. As you see, the header was attached to our request with the bearer prefix with the space, and then as you see, we have the response body. So our authentication works fine. Before trying to create an Angular application, you have to make sure that you have the Node.js installed in your machine. So I will just recommend to go to the nodejs.org and then download the latest Node.js version. If you have this installed, then in the angular.io with the / of the CLI, you have this npm install command that you can install the Angular. I'm using the Angular with the version 17. Alright, now we can go to our token-based authentication demo.api project, and inside of it I'll create the UI, so the Angular application. So I'll just change the directory to token-based authentication demo.api, and inside of it we can create an Angular app with the usage of following command. So it will be ng new token-based authentication demo.ui, and we have to specify also just to have the normal Angular application without any shortcuts, dash no standalone. So it will be no the standalone version. Yes, we'll pick the CSS and no. And now all the npm packages will be installed in our UI. Alright, and as you see, the token-based authentication demo.ui Angular app has been created. We have the src folder, and inside of it we have the app with the app module, app component, and so on and so forth. So we can just go inside of it and run this Angular app. We'll open this in the terminal and we'll run ng serve command. As you see, we have this initial setup page, and now we can go and create our components, the login component and also the service, to communicate with the API to get the access token and then also to store the refresh token, but we'll implement everything in just a minute. We'll download one npm package that is called Bootstrap. Bootstrap allows you to have a very good looking UI without having too many troubles with the CSS, because it's the UI library, and we'll reuse an existing form from the Bootstrap for this email and the password, and also the button that is down below to submit the login process. So we have to run this npm install bootstrap and then to attach in the Angular JSON file some of the commands. So I will just go and install the bootstrap in the src directory. So I'll just run npm install bootstrap. Now we have to go to the angular.json file. Now we have to find the styles and also the scripts. So for the styles, we have to introduce node modules / bootstrap dist css bootstrap min.css. And for the scripts one, we have to introduce the same, but we'll change this from the node modules bootstrap dist. Then the CSS will be replaced with the JS and bootstrap.min.js. Alright, so I will just wipe out the content of the app component.html file, and here we'll have to copy the existing form. I'll paste this in our app component.html and I will run ng serve. And as you see, we have that email address, password, and submit, and it actually looks not like the pure HTML, so our Bootstrap has been properly installed in the Angular app. I will create a couple of the directories inside of the app directory in order to keep our components and services, interceptors, and so on separated. So I will just start with that. So I will create components directory. Also, what will be needed for us, so the services, also the models, and also the interceptors. And we'll start with the models. So I'll just create first file that will be called login request. Login request.ts. Here we have to write export interface login request, and it will be the email, the type of the string, and also the password. The next model will be called login response. Response.ts, and the same export interface login response, and the response was in the following structure. So we will have the token type from our API, then we'll have the access token, so the JWT token, then expires in as the number, and also the refresh token. And the last one, but not least, it was the product. So I'll just type product.ts, and I will just copy paste an existing interface. So it was ID, name, description, price, and the quantity. As you remember, it was same. We'll make sure, yes, ID, name, description, price, and the quantity. So one-to-one the same. The next thing that we'll focus on will be the services. So we have to create two services, one for retrieving the products from our API and one for the authentication purposes. So I'll just open the terminal in that services directory, and I will just type ng g, so generate, s, that stands for the services, and it will be called auth. And it created for us the specification file, so we don't need the tests for now. So I'll delete it, and the next service will be called product, and we'll just skip the tests. So -- skip tests. Now we'll go and we'll create the GET request from our frontend side to our API. So I'll just go to the ProductService.ts, and we have to inject the HTTP client in our constructor. So I'll just type private HTTP client of type HTTP client. And inside of it, we have to create the method to retrieve the products from our API. So it will be called getProducts, and it will return an observable of type product we have created, and it will be an array products. And inside of it, has to return the value, of course. So we'll just return this HTTP client dot get, and as the type that will retrieve, it will be the product array. And in here, as you see, we have the URL for our API, and this is localhost with a port 5200. So I'll just type localhost 5200 with a slash get products. And now, before performing any HTTP request, we have to import two very important modules in our app.module.ts file, and those are HTTP client module and the forms module. We have to import those. As we see in the Swagger, our authentication service will call this login endpoint. So this login endpoint has an example value of email and a password, so that's what we have in our login request, and the response will be as it is. So the token type, access token, expires in, and also the refresh token. So we have to call this endpoint. We can start with injecting the HTTP client to the auth service. So private HTTP client with the type of HTTP client. Of course, we have to import this from the Angular common HTTP, and we'll create a login request method. So it will be called login, and we'll pass the credentials, so the email and the password as the parameter. The credentials will be the login request type, and inside we'll also specify that it will return an observable of the login response. So observable of the login response. We'll import this, and also observable from the RxJS. And inside of it, we'll just return this HTTP client post, because we are calling the post endpoint, login response as the return type, and we have to pass once again the URL. So the URL will be HTTP localhost 5200 with the login at the end, and we'll pass the credentials, because we need to pass this login request to the body. And then after retrieving what we'll get, we'll use the pipe and also the map function, and we'll just map and take this response. So import the map function, and with this login response, we have to set the access token that we'll get from our API to the local storage of the browser. So I will just do it like so. So local storage dot set item method, and inside of it I will just assign this to the key called access token, and we'll get this from the response dot access token. And the next thing to do is to assign the cookie for the refresh token. So I will just type document dot cookie. So create dot cookie, and inside of it, we'll just type refresh token that we'll get from our API with the $sign response dot refresh token and the comma. And then we'll just simply return the response. The next method that we'll create is the refresh token. So when our access token will expire and it will be only 60 seconds, then we have to perform the request to our API to refresh this access token to get the new one, and then to use this JWT token to authenticate to get the product list. So I will just create the refresh token method, and it will return for us observable of type login response. And we have to get the refresh token from the cookie that we have just assigned here. So I will just write the const refresh token is equal to this get refresh token from cookie method that we'll create over there. So it will be the private get refresh token from cookie, and it will return string or null. So we have to retrieve this refresh token from our cookie. So the first thing to do is just to assign the cookie string, because the cookies are in the string. So cookie string that we'll have in our browser. So as we assigned, so document.cookie. The next thing is just to get the cookie array out of that cookie document. So we'll just type const cookie array, and we'll retrieve everything based on the splitter that will be the semicolon. So from the cookie string we have to split, and based on the semicolon and the space. And then in the for loop, so for const cookie in cookie of cookie array, inside we'll have the const, and we'll get the name and the value. So name and the value out from this certain cookie, and we'll also split this by the equal sign to get the value. So cookie.split, and we'll split this with the equal sign, and then if the name will be the same as the refresh token, then and only then we'll just return the value of that refresh token. And if we'll not have anything, then we'll just return null in that case. And then just the normal HTTP request. So we'll just return this .http client. It was the post method to get the refresh token. So I'll just post this, and we'll get the login response out of it. The URL will be http localhost 5200 with the refresh as you see, and then inside of the body we have to pass this refresh token. So it will be the refresh token, And then we have to as well pipe this, use the map function to get the response. And the response with the lowercase. And then actually we'll have the same functionality. We have to assign the new access token in our local storage to get the refresh token to our cookie and then return the response out of that. We'll also create two more methods. That will be the very simple one. So logout. So we have to remove from our local storage the access token. So local storage dot remove item and with the key access token, and also is logged in helper method that will return for us the boolean, and it will give us an indicator if the user is logged in or not. So return local storage dot get item with the access token key, and then it's not equal to null. And now once we have our services implemented already, so we can create two components, one for the login, so the login component, and also the product list component. So I will just go inside of that components directory and I will just run the command. So ng g for generate, c for the component, and it will be called login, and I will just type as well skip tests. And the next one, ng g component product list skip tests. We can start with the declaration of the product list component.ts file. So I will just type export class product list component that was already here, and it will implement on init, and this on init comes from the Angular core. It will be there. As you see, we have to implement the interface on init, and inside of it we'll use our load products method that will create in just a moment. So products will be the array of the product. We have to, of course, import this model, and as an initial state it will be empty, and we have to create load products to the type of void, and we have to call our product service. So of course inside of it we have to also create the constructor to inject the product service into our component. So constructor, and inside I will just type private product service of the type product service. Now we can type that this dot product service dot get products. We have to subscribe to get value out from the observable, so the response, and when we will get this response, then we'll assign this to the product. So this dot products are equal to the response. And we have to remove this throw new error that it's not implemented, and we'll use, of course, this load products method. And now we can go to the product list component.html just to create some simple table with the headers and also the body that we'll get from our API. So I'll just remove that product list works as the placeholder that was added automatically. So I'll just create table. Inside of the table we'll have t head, so the headers. Then we'll have the table row, and the header, the first one will be the ID. I'll just create 5 of those, and it will be name, description, also the price and the quantity, and we'll also create the t body, so table body, and the table row, and we'll just use the ng4 just to iterate through our products. So ng4 let product of products, and it already sees that we have the products array, and inside of it we'll just create also 5 of those fields, and inside of it we'll just get the product.id, and we'll just copy paste one by one, but we'll change the properties. So it was name, it was description, price, and also the quantity. Now we can implement also the login component. So the implements on init, and this on init will be from the Angular core. We have to implement also that interface. And at once we'll create the constructor because we have to inject the auth service. So private auth service, and inside of it we have to create the initial state of the credentials, so the email and the password. So the credentials as the type of login request, and in here equals, and it will be email will be empty, and also the password will be empty as well. And now we have to call the isLoggedIn method from the authentication service. So isLoggedIn, because we would like just to get the product list when the user is authenticated and is logged in. So return this auth service dot is logged in, as we have implemented before. And now the login request. So the login request for us will work like so. So this authentication service dot login, and as you remember, we have to pass the credentials. So this dot credentials, and after that we'll just subscribe, and we will write the console.log, and it will be the login successful indicator for us that everything went fine. And now we have to also remove this throw new error, and we'll just check when it will be initialized if the user is logged in. Alright, and now we can take that form that we have copy and paste in our app component HTML, and we can take this form and put in our login component.html and modify a little bit. I'll just create one div, and also inside of it we'll have one div that will center for us the content and so on and so forth. So it will be div class, will be the container d-flex, justify content center, align items center, items center, and then margin top with the value of 4. And then also one more div just to make this a little bit smaller. So div style with the width of 50%. And now we can take this whole form, put inside of div, just remove unnecessary lines. And now in this form we have to type ng submit, and this ng submit will be after pressing the login button, and we have to invoke this login method, and it will be with a class of margin bottom 4. And now we have to change this a little bit, just maybe remove this at once, div class, this one, this one, this one. We'll just leave this submit button, but we'll just type div class with this form group, and inside of this form group we'll have the label for the email, label for email, and then have to create the input field. So input type email with the ID of email. Now everything works fine. Also the name will be email, so email, and now we'll take the ng model, so ng model, and it will be equal to the credentials dot email. So we'll have the two-way binding for it. Will be the class of the form control from the Bootstrap, and it's required. And the same we'll have for the password, but with the different IDs. So password, I'll change this very fast. Credentials dot password, and also will be the password. And the primary button, yes, but we'll have also the need for the spacing a little bit. The margin top 2. We're out of this form. And now the last important part. So div with the ng if. So ng if, and we have to check if the user is logged in. So is logged in method, and if the user is actually logged in, then we can add this app product list component. Now we can go to our app.component.html. We can remove everything from there, and we'll add just app.login component. And this component, the product list, will be injected as the child component. As you see, we have the email and the password form and also the submit. So everything was properly set up, but the last thing to do, we need to actually retrieve that JWT token, and then while performing any of the requests that will require for us the authorization, we need to attach this JWT token to the header, because without that we will not have any OK response from our API. So we have to create an JWT interceptor that will attach the token to our request. Alright, now we'll create an interceptor to attach the JWT token that we retrieved from our API to the next request. So I'll just create the TypeScript file called JWT interceptor.ts. And inside of it, we'll just write the flag injectable, and then export class, JWT interceptor implements HTTP interceptor. Open this up. We'll create the constructor, and we have to inject the private AuthService to get the JWT token. So authentication service, we have to inject. And then we'll just type intercept method, and the request will be HTTP request of type any, and the next will be HTTP handler, import all of those, and also the HTTP interceptor as well. And I'll just return observable of type HTTP event, and also any. So I have to import as well HTTP event observable, yes, we have to return something from that method. So alright, we'll start with the is logged in. check from our authentication service. So this AuthService dot is logged in. And now, if the user is actually logged in, then to the request, because this interceptor will catch the request, it will just clone this request with the usage of this clone method, and will just inside update the request and attach the JWT token to it with also the per sign. So we have to use the set headers, and the set headers authorization equal to bearer, the space, and then we have to use the $sign to get this from the local storage. So the local storage dot get item, and also we have to specify the key, so the access token, and after that we'll just return next dot handle and then this request. And this JWT interceptor has to be registered in the app.module.ts. So we have to go there, app.module.ts, and inside of the providers, we have to type provide http underscore interceptors we have to update the import, of course, and we have to use the class, and it will be called JWT interceptor, and also we'll assign this to the multi and we'll set this to true. And now I have created the one user in our API with the usage of the register method. So I'll just type user email.com, and it was user123 ! And I'll click submit. As you see, we have the products that are loaded from our API. So that's the very successful scenario. In the console, we have the login successful. We can go to the application to see, yes, as you see in the cookies, we have the value of that refresh token. So this is the value of my cookie, and we have the local storage and also the access token. We have one more problem because, as you see, I have refreshed the page and we have actually the empty list, but this is the indication that we have some kind of an error that occurred. And as you see, we have 401 unauthorized. So 401 unauthorized means that our JWT token has actually expired. So we have to refresh this JWT after 60 seconds to get the new access token, and then to be able to get all of those items from our API. So we have to create one more interceptor in case of any error. So I'll just create one more interceptor that will be called error interceptor .ts. I can just copy paste everything just to not be worried about any imports, and then we will modify the content of it. It will be called error interceptor, but the content will be a little bit different. And now we will modify the content of that intercept method because the behavior will be slightly different. We have to remove everything and react on the error that will occur after performing an HTTP request. So next.handle request, then the pipe method, and inside of that pipe we'll use the catch error method. We have to import this from the RxJS. And now, in case of any error, we have to type if statement, and if the error is instance of HTTP error response, we have to update the import, and error.status is equal to 401, so unauthorized, that we will receive from our API. Then also one more check. If the request is actually not the login, so the request URL dot includes the login, then we have to handle one more request to the refresh endpoint, because if our access token will be expired, then we'll have the 401, but only to the endpoints that are not the login endpoint, because of course we'll have the 401 when we'll insert not the proper credentials, then we have 401, and then we'll try to get and also refresh the token. It's not the way to go, of course, so we have to return this handle 401 error, and we'll pass the request and also the next. I'll create that method, so it will be the private handle 401 error, and inside of it we'll have the request, that is HTTP request of the type any as the first param, and also the next will be the HTTP handler, and then we'll return an observable of type HTTP event, and also the any type inside. And now we have to type return this authentication service, because we have to refresh the token, of course. So using the refresh token method that we have in our service, also the pipe method, and then switch map function from the RxJS, and then we'll just return next dot handle this add token to the request, and we have to create also this method, and this method will be very similar to the method that we had before in our JWT interceptor. I'll just copy paste this. As you see, we are adding the token, we're getting the access token that was actually updated, because as you remember in that refresh token, here we are setting the new access token, so we'll have the new access token here, and we are cloning the request, and we are attaching this as the bearer token. So everything will be handle, and this return next handle will add and perform one more time the HTTP request. and then it will be successful after getting the new token from our API. And now also the catch error will get the error. In case that it will be not handled correctly, then and only then we'll have the catch error. I'll just update this import from the RxJS, and as you see here, logout user or handle error as needed. So actually we are logging out the user in case of any error after 401 unauthorized once again. We have to go a little bit up, and now else we are returning the throw error in case that it will be the login endpoint. We're actually throwing an error in that case, and also here we'll also return an error. We have to go back to our app.module.ts, and we have to do the same for our error interceptor, so it will be only the different name. And as you see, I have refreshed the page. We had the 401 unauthorized at first from the get products, but after that, as you see here, we have the refresh request, and then we have the get products from it. So that means that our mechanism works fine. We have the 401. If you would like to, you can just suppress this kind of error. I just left this on purpose just to see that we have at first 401, and then it's refreshed, and then we have the new access token, and we have the proper response from our API. So everything works fine as we wish.